Yeah.
Months ago, and it was regard to forming at the federal level, a commission to manage the energy strategy of the country and not put it in the political environment, that we end up with all these short-term decisions like we do with tax policy, and you end up not making good long-term plans if it's always by the expedient short-term tax need or the expedient short-term energy need. Would you care to comment about the feasibility of moving national energy policy, first at the federal level and then at the state level, to a commission structure and remove it from the political environment?
Yeah. Sorry about the static, it must be me. That's a great question. I've heard other folks talk about this concept. We actually have, for certain sectors, we already have something like that. So we have the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, which is primarily focused on electric power issues, or at least the way I've interacted with them. And they are nonpartisan. The idea of more nonpartisan organizations. Well, first off, let me back up and say, I think there's a lot of value in trying to take the politics out of energy policy, because I think energy policy, there's a lot more this country, individuals across the political spectrum agree on about energy policy than disagree on about energy policy. And we've seen it in some polling data. I think across the political spectrum, we see support for renewable energy and a willingness to pay just a little bit more for renewable energy, for example, poll in the 80s and 90s, in that range. So I think most people get it, even if our politicians are looking to make political hay one side or the other on this issue. So I think it would be interesting, and one of the things that we're trying to do is be non-partisan. The administration is trying to be apolitical in a lot of ways. And my background is not political, and I would love to not be political at all, and I really do try to get ideas from all industries and all across the political spectrum. But the idea of a commission, I mean, it has some merits. I guess the devil's always in the details to figure out what that actually looks like. And I don't know that it would be a panacea. The Fed is supposed to be pretty nonpartisan, and it's been under a lot of attack from both left and right politically. So I don't know that it's necessarily the answer, but I would be interested to see if it could deal with some of the issues. I agree with the issues that you mentioned. There's always some short-term thinking about energy policy, and that's true politically, but it's also true, I think, in the private sector as well. While there is some long-term thinking out there in R&D and investment that happens in the private sector and the public sector, the private sector folks are under the same kind of quarterly earnings pressures as well. So some sort of national commission could be an interesting idea, but I think a lot depends on the details. Yep.
One of the things he talked about was low-hanging fruit. He spoke about waste management converting their trucks, the trucking industry, and that each truck that they convert essentially takes the equivalent of 30 cars off the road, something like that. What are you doing here?
So that's a great perspective. Of course, we want to start with the most economical stuff first. And luckily, that stuff hasn't needed a lot of government intervention to actually make happen. So the city of Grand Junction runs their own trash collection, trash hauling, and they actually have, for about 6 months now, had their trucks, or they've been started converting their trucks to compressed natural gas. They've had some challenges. The trucks are a little longer, so they have a hard time getting in the alleys. Some of them are a little higher to store the gas. They have some problems with power lines. But they've been able to work through those, and the vehicle performance has been outstanding. The fleet manager loves these things. And just recently, Republic announced in Commerce City that they're going to be converting their entire fleet of about 140 vehicles to compressed natural gas. And I was lucky enough to be at the ribbon cutting for that. And I love to go to those ribbon cuttings because I get to be associated with a good news story, even though I had absolutely nothing to do with that decision. But the private sector is taking the low-hanging fruit, and that's fantastic. And so what we think the opportunity is to accelerate into other sectors and help other areas that might be the next level of economics think about how they move forward. And so, for example, school buses are another opportunity. They're not quite as attractive economically today as trash trucks are, but they're pretty close. But the big issue for school districts is, the school budgets are in terrible shape right now based on bigger economic factors. And so we need to figure out other ways we can help them finance investments in the school bus fleet so that they can realize this opportunity that is a positive from an NPV or a return on investment perspective, but they don't have the funds today to make that investment. So absolutely, that is how we are thinking about this. How can we move down the chain from the most attractive economic opportunities and help that next thing that's on the cusp move forward? But natural gas is a fantastic fuel. It's fantastic for electric power sector as well. It's probably the most flexible fuel in terms of responsiveness to changing demand and changing other grid conditions. It's a very clean burning fuel. It's fantastic. And part of the challenge, or one of the reasons why we deviated from a gas boom that we had in the late 90s, early 2000s, was the fact that at that time we were basically running out of supplies of natural gas. And so natural gas prices were becoming very volatile. They became very high. After Hurricane Katrina, natural gas prices hit $15 per million BTU. In the last few years, we've had shale gas come online, and that represents a huge paradigm shift to tell us that, I'm not 100% bought in. I'm probably 80 to 90% bought in that shale gas is going to be a big part of our mix going forward. The reason I'm not 100% is because when I worked at Calpine, Nick mentioned I worked on the trade floor, I was helping them prepare for bankruptcy because they believed the last time the gas industry said, we have cheap gas forever. They made billions of dollars in investment in the space, and as a result, went into bankruptcy when gas prices did go up. But I think the paradigm is different now. And I think gas is going to be an increasing portion of our electric power mix. And so it's a fantastic fuel for us. I will say, just with current technology prices, wind energy has now become the cheapest source of electric power. Well, efficiency is the cheapest. We should go for efficiency first. But wind energy has become the cheapest, but it's not as flexible a fuel as natural gas is. And so I think for Colorado, in the short term, we're going to see a lot more wind and gas come on the system. And that's going to be our near-term investment.
I believe that there is little, if any, question that presently, and this may be 10, 20, or 30 years away, that the energy power will be solely nuclear. I think that the fossil fuels, I'm not saying I think, we know that the fossil fuels are limited and that the oil industry will be reduced to a situation of lubrication. I would like your comments on how we should build toward making people comfortable with that probably most safe method of producing energy, which people don't recognize, which is nuclear.
Well, thanks for the question. I like to joke the governor and I disagree about nuclear energy. The governor doesn't think nuclear energy is a good idea because of waste concerns, and I think nuclear energy is a bad idea because of the cost. So actually, we have a different perspective on nuke. I think more fundamentally, whether the waste issue gets resolved or not, Colorado has been blessed with access to really cheap natural gas, to historically very cheap coal, and now a fantastic wind resource. And the idea that nuclear is cheap was an idea that created a bit of a nuclear boom in the 60s and 70s. And when nuclear turned out not to be as cheap as folks had hoped in that generation of technology, we stopped seeing investment in new nuke plants. There has been some talk the last 5 years or so about maybe there's time for a nuclear renaissance. But we haven't seen those nuclear plans advance, and I think it is because nuclear energy, we haven't been able to demonstrate that it is going to be cost effective when we compare it to other generation technologies. Now that's all dependent on, it's dependent on two things. One is dependent on the technology itself, and if we can make technological advances in that space, it may turn out that nuke is the right way to go. The other issue that drives the cost, and just as big a factor, is the regulatory regime that we have. It's incredibly expensive to permit and to make sure that you've got all the regulatory I's dotted and T's crossed. Now, I don't know, I'm not enough of a nuke expert to be able to tell you that, there are huge savings that we can have by reform of the regulatory process. But what I can tell you is that we have yet to see demonstrated anywhere in the world that nuclear energy would be cheaper than gas primarily fueled by shale gas and wind energy with current technology.